case-by-case basis and considered a crime if you commit a terrorist act. The United States considers it a philosophical battle against the jihad. Look where that ended up, Iraq. Like, these are like the consequences of unilateral policy imposition that just don't work. If we have more practical case-by-case implementation, maybe we can achieve some of the effects that they want. But simply put, that's not what they're endorsing on their side of the resolution. They have to endorse a unilateral approach. The second independent point is about the efficacy of actually implementing these sanctions. Recognize that it's going to be very difficult to actually implement these sanctions and say, we're going to take money from you here and now. It's just going to be very hard to impose, and I don't think they lay out any groundwork for telling you how they're going to actually make it work such that they achieve the ends that they want to achieve. Also, sanctions in general and their efficacy. I think people can see that the U.S. is also going to be damaging people on the ground, like in a very real sense. Like, recognize that like if we privatize these industries, it's not as if like if we let these industries, we sanction them such to the extent that they still stay private. It's not as if we're going to be helping anybody. In fact, when we impose sanctions, those sanctions go directly to hurt the people on the ground, the lowest rung of society. Those are the people that are probably most prone to discontent with the United States and could be whipped up sentiment against the United States. And it's probably going to cause a lot of problems when the United States images we are directly hurting the poor people of this nation. Because recognize that these sanctions aren't going to be hurting the people at the top of these industries that probably already have a lot of resources. So we're never going to actually be hurting the dictators in any meaningful sense. We're not going to be punishing them for anything that they've done wrong by like mistreating their people or whatever happens to be going on. So we're really not actually gaining any efficacy from imposing these sanctions in general. The third independent point is about backlash. Simply put, like I said earlier, you're going to be creating this image that the United States is out to get like almost all of these countries, and especially in countries like that have very delicate civil societies, like emerging nations that are trying to get their feet on the ground in terms of democracy. To be imposing this in the United States, to be saying like this is how your economy should run, doesn't do any good for us to actually impose some of the ideals that we would rather have these people adopt. Like we would rather have them have democracy rather than being stuck in poverty. So at that point, we're not really achieving some of the other goals that we want to do, and we're going to be generating a backlash against the United States. It hurts our image abroad.
Wouldn't you think it would be preferable to encourage a free market society in these countries rather than, say, a social society, which inherently discourages the democratic activities?
All right, sure, maybe you achieved some marginal economic betterment, but it's still the same problem as the experience machine. The experience machine is saying that like people can plug into the experience machine and gain utility. We say that this is wrong because they're not meaningfully experiencing utility because they don't have the other rights that go along with actually achieving that utility on a basis that affirms their individual worth. At the point at which we're not going to be able to pass on some of the ideals that we would like people to have, like democracy, free governments, rights, and rights protection and the like, because we're sacrificing it and saying, oh, just give them some economic utility and they'll be fine. I think this is very problematic. No, thank you, I just took you. So I don't think that that's where we should be going with this. So now moving case side. They say that economically nationalization is bad. It's inefficient. It just doesn't work. And so this is the reason why we should not. This is why we should impose sanctions on it. I don't think imposing sanctions is going to actually make an economy run better. I think recognize that anytime you introduce a tax into a market, there's always going to be some sort of deadweight loss, utility, benefit that both consumers and suppliers could gain from selling their products and getting the products at the price they want, that is always going to be there if you impose sanctions and taxes that make goods actually increase in price. The other problem with this is recognize that oil is what we're talking about. It's not going to be specifically a competitive market, such that like if we let privatization occur, all these different people are going to be able to gain oil and like produce it in the market, and the price is going to go down because supply is going up. No, oil is a very scarce resource. One of the reasons why companies one of the reasons why oil companies make a lot of money is because the product that they are selling is not being sold by a lot of other people. At the point at which you don't have a perfectly competitive environment in which this is occurring, you're not going to be achieving the price stabilization that they try to appeal to on their side of the house. Now look down to this other point under the first independent point, when they talk about not being fair to these corporations who've made this investment. I think that, I think that if you say that like we should be fair to these corporations because they're making this capital investment is really, really bad. Because the United States is then we're like endorsing these corporations, and that is just really, really bad, because then it promotes this image that the United States is like kind of meddling within these other countries' interests. So moving on to the second independent point, I already kind of addressed some of this already, so I'll just like be quick with that. They say that it's in the U.S.'s best interest to do this. First, I have to ask why. why is this our right to do this, impose these sanctions? They've never laid out a framework for saying like why our interests are at heart, and that's why we ought to impose these sanctions. They've never given us any higher framework than just saying that like, well, it's for our own good. They've never given us any sort of philosophy that backs this up. I'm waiting to hear what that is. And even if that is the case, even if this is in our best interest, and they do provide the philosophy, why have they specifically warranted why sanctions are the best option to actually achieve this? I think I've already pointed out some holes in pointing out that like we're not going to necessarily be achieving all the good that we want, and we have significant harms in terms of backlash in our image overseas. There's going to be really problematic. So then they talk about keeping prices low under this point. I already kind of addressed this and told you why it's not a perfectly competitive market. It's a very scarce resource, which means that you're not going to get a lot of stabilization. They talk about private companies are going to make a profit, and this is good for everybody. But recognize within these developing countries, the private corporations that are doing this are probably not going to be doing it to the betterment of the rest of the people. They're probably just going to be running like any other corporation, maximize profit, give it back to our shareholders. Do you think the people in a developing nation are going to be shareholders of an oil company? I just don't think so. At the point at which their profits are going off the roof, their share price would be going high. People in these countries that are probably economically depressed are probably not going to have the money to buy stock in this company. Even if you do say that they have, they can gain jobs from it. I still don't think that that's going to be enough to outlet what you just
Yeah, but we don't have, as I said, an environment of nationalization and having these, places where we actually have stable investment. We're going to have capital coming into the countries and investing in it. It's not just the oil that we're talking about.
Yeah, okay, so great. You've succeeded in making those corporations better off, but you haven't succeeded in making the people in those countries better off at all. That's where this entire advocacy fails. You're just going to be breeding the same cycle of corruption. At least if you nationalize it, the people can get a dividend from those oil profits and get some money back from it. At that point, we're helping these people out. They talk about depression and if there's less of a depression, but recognize that nationalization of the oil industry can be a perfectly good way to contain like disrespect and discontent in a country. Say like the country's like really mad at like all those like the oil barons. Let's nationalize the industry rather than overthrowing the regime. This is a viable outlet for discontent for people, so they won't like overthrow the government or do anything that's like that much more drastic. So I think the gist of op philosophy is basically, Gov has not provided us a reason why we should affirm this on a wholehearted basis, a convincing philosophy for why there ever should be a wholehearted basis for it, why this is our right, and even so, why is this the best option? For these reasons, we're proud to oppose.